My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment, because something is unfolding in the quiet spaces you cannot see, and the reason behind it is far more personal than you might imagine. Your soulmate is overwhelmed with joy right now, but this happiness did not appear from nowhere. Something shifted. Something they had almost stopped hoping for suddenly became possible again. And strangely, beautifully, unexpectedly, the thought at the center of that joy is connected to you. Stay here, because the most important part is not simply that they are happy. It is why they are happy. There is a reason their heart feels lighter today. There is a reason they keep returning to one particular thought even while trying to focus on everything else around them. And there is a reason an emotion they have been holding back for longer than anyone realizes is finally beginning to rise to the surface. What happened inside them was quiet, almost invisible, but it changed something important. For a long time, your soulmate has carried questions they rarely allowed themselves to say aloud. They wondered whether certain connections are meant to survive distance, misunderstanding, silence, timing, and fear. They wondered whether two people could still feel drawn toward one another even after life placed complications between them. Most of all, they wondered whether what they felt when they thought about you was genuine or simply their heart holding on to a beautiful possibility. They tried to be practical. They tried to silence the feeling. They tried to tell themselves that if something were truly meant to happen, everything would already be obvious. But the heart does not always reveal its deepest truths through obvious moments. Sometimes truth arrives quietly. Sometimes it arrives through a memory that suddenly feels different. Sometimes it arrives when a person realizes that no matter how many distractions they place around themselves, one name still carries a different weight. And recently, your soulmate experienced exactly that kind of realization. There was a moment when they were alone with their thoughts, perhaps during an ordinary part of the day when nothing dramatic was happening around them. Yet inside them, something unexpected opened. A memory of you appeared. Not necessarily a grand memory. It could have been something incredibly simple, the way you once spoke, the kindness behind something you did, a small detail about your personality, or merely the feeling they associate with your presence. And suddenly they smiled. Not the polite smile people show the world. A real one. The kind that arrives before you even realize you are smiling. Then something even more surprising happened. Instead of pushing the thought away as they had done before, they allowed themselves to stay with it. They let themselves imagine what would happen if they stopped fighting the connection. They imagined what it might feel like to speak honestly. They imagined what it would be like to stop pretending they were unaffected. They imagined a future in which uncertainty no longer controlled their decisions. That is where the joy began. But there is more. Because this was not simply nostalgia. Your soulmate realized something about you that changed the emotional meaning of everything they had been carrying. For months, perhaps longer, they believed they needed certainty before allowing themselves to move toward what they truly wanted. They thought they needed every question answered, every fear removed, every possible outcome guaranteed. They believed courage would come after certainty. Now they are beginning to understand something completely different. Courage comes first. Certainty sometimes comes later. And that realization has shaken them in the most beautiful way. They have begun asking themselves a question they avoided before: what if I have been protecting myself so carefully that I have also been keeping myself away from something beautiful? That question stayed with them. It followed them into quiet moments. It appeared when they looked at their phone. It returned when they heard conversations about love, timing, commitment, or second chances. And every time it returned, the answer inside them became harder to ignore. They do not want fear making every decision anymore. That is part of the big news. Something inside your soulmate has moved from hesitation toward possibility. Not recklessness. Not fantasy. Possibility. And sometimes possibility is where everything begins. There was another realization too, and this one touched them even more deeply. Your soulmate began thinking about all the ways you may have affected their life without even knowing it. Perhaps something you said once encouraged them when they were struggling. Perhaps the memory of your strength reminded them to keep going. Perhaps your presence showed them what sincerity feels like. Perhaps they simply noticed that thinking of you brought them a strange sense of calm during a season when very little else did. They had overlooked those details before. Now they are connecting them. And as those pieces began coming together, they felt something they were not expecting. Gratitude. Deep gratitude. They realized that whatever happens next, knowing you changed something inside them. That realization alone was enough to bring emotion into their eyes. But the joy you are hearing about goes deeper still. Because your soulmate has been privately afraid that they had missed their moment. There were times when they looked backward and questioned their choices. They wondered whether they waited too long, misunderstood something important, allowed outside opinions to become too loud, or let pride prevent them from expressing what their heart was actually trying to say. They replayed certain moments. They imagined different versions of conversations. They thought about words they could have spoken but didn't. And although nobody around them may have realized it, those thoughts carried weight. Yet something has recently changed the way they see those memories. Instead of viewing the past only as proof of what went wrong, they are beginning to see it as preparation. They are realizing that perhaps they needed those uncomfortable lessons. They needed to discover what silence costs. They needed to understand what happens when fear is given too much authority. They needed to recognize the difference between protecting their heart and imprisoning it. And now they know. That knowledge has created an unexpected sense of freedom. This is why their joy feels so intense. It is not merely happiness about you. It is happiness about who they are becoming because of what this connection forced them to confront. They are beginning to feel emotionally brave again. Pause here, because there is something they have not told anyone. There is a sentence forming inside your soulmate's heart. They have almost said it before. They have imagined saying it to you. They have even rehearsed how they might explain themselves if the opportunity appeared. But every time they reached the emotional doorway, they stepped backward. Not because they felt nothing. Because they felt too much. They worried that honesty would make them vulnerable. They worried you might misunderstand. They worried the timing might be wrong. They worried that opening their heart would change everything. And they were right about one thing. It would change everything. That is exactly why they kept hesitating. But now something extraordinary is happening. The possibility of change no longer frightens them the way it once did. In fact, they are beginning to want it. Your soulmate has grown tired of emotional limbo. Tired of wondering. Tired of carrying conversations that exist only inside their imagination. Tired of pretending certain feelings disappeared simply because they were never spoken. There comes a moment when the heart becomes exhausted from hiding. Your soulmate may be reaching that moment now. And the joy is coming from one powerful realization: they may finally be ready to do something they once believed they could never do. They may be ready to tell the truth. Not an exaggerated truth. Not a dramatic promise. The simple truth. That you matter. That your presence affected them. That they have thought about you more often than they admitted. That something about this connection stayed alive inside them even when circumstances became confusing. And perhaps most importantly, that they no longer want to run from understanding why. But before that truth reaches the surface, there is another layer you need to understand. Your soulmate's happiness is connected to a decision. A private decision. Nobody may know about it yet. Their friends may not know. Their family may not know. Even you certainly may not know. But within themselves, they have started choosing differently. They are choosing not to let old disappointments predict every future outcome. They are choosing not to judge you entirely through the lens of previous relationships. They are choosing to question the voices that told them vulnerability was weakness. And slowly, they are choosing honesty over emotional self-protection. That choice has brought them relief. Imagine carrying something heavy for so long that you forget what life felt like before the weight existed. Then imagine finally putting it down. That is close to what they are feeling. They did not realize how much energy was required to constantly suppress what they wanted. Every time your name entered their mind, they analyzed it. Every time they felt tenderness, they questioned it. Every time hope appeared, they challenged it. Every time their intuition whispered, they demanded proof. Eventually, they became tired of arguing with themselves. And then came the moment that changed everything. They asked themselves one simple question. What if this feeling is not asking me to know the entire future? What if it is only asking me to be honest about the present? Something softened. They did not need to know how every chapter would end. They did not need a guarantee. They simply needed permission to admit what was already true inside them. And when they gave themselves that permission, joy rushed into the space where fear had been sitting. That is the happiness surrounding them now. Freedom from pretending. Freedom from constantly denying themselves. Freedom from needing every answer before taking one sincere step. And there is something else. Your soulmate has begun imagining seeing you again under different circumstances. This image has returned more than once. They imagine standing near you without the old tension. They imagine looking into your eyes without needing to hide behind carefully chosen words. They imagine hearing your voice and allowing themselves to simply enjoy the moment rather than analyzing every second afterward. They imagine laughter. They imagine calm. They imagine the strange relief of realizing that perhaps neither of you needed to be perfect for something meaningful to exist. And whenever they imagine this, their heart responds before their mind can interfere. That response has become impossible for them to ignore. They have started recognizing the difference between anxiety and excitement. Before, they confused the two. Whenever their heart beat faster because of you, they assumed it meant danger. Whenever they felt emotionally exposed, they assumed they should retreat. Whenever they cared deeply, they believed they were losing control. Now they understand something they did not understand before. Sometimes the heart beats faster because something matters. Sometimes vulnerability appears because something is real enough to risk being seen. Sometimes losing control simply means releasing the illusion that everything meaningful can be managed. This realization has changed the emotional atmosphere around them. People near them may even notice. Someone may ask why they seem different. Why they are smiling more. Why they appear distracted in a pleasant way. Why their energy suddenly feels lighter. They may shrug. They may laugh. They may change the subject. Because how could they explain what is happening without mentioning you? And they are not ready for everyone to know. Not yet. There is something precious about keeping this realization private while they understand it. They want to protect it from opinions. They have learned what happens when too many voices enter a situation before the heart itself has spoken clearly. This time, they want their own voice to be the loudest. That alone represents enormous growth. There was once a version of your soulmate who would have asked everyone what to do. They would have gathered opinions, compared advice, analyzed possibilities, waited for somebody else to validate what they already knew. But something has changed. They are learning that no friend, family member, stranger, or outside observer can completely understand what happens inside their heart when they think about you. Only they know. And for perhaps the first time, they are respecting that knowledge. This is where the mystery becomes even deeper. Because their joy is not only about accepting their feelings. Something happened that made them believe there may still be a door open. It was subtle. So subtle that another person might have dismissed it completely. But your soulmate did not. Perhaps they remembered something you said. Perhaps they noticed a small detail they had previously overlooked. Perhaps they reconsidered an old interaction from a more mature perspective. Perhaps they realized they had interpreted your silence incorrectly. Whatever the exact trigger was, it caused one thought to enter their mind. Maybe I was wrong about what this meant. That thought changed the entire emotional landscape. Suddenly, what they had considered finished began to feel unfinished. What they had considered impossible began to feel uncertain rather than impossible. And uncertainty, strangely enough, gave them hope. Not because they believe everything will magically resolve itself, but because they realized the story may not be as closed as they assumed. That realization brought an almost childlike happiness into their heart. For a moment, they allowed themselves to dream again. They pictured what they would say if they had one completely honest conversation with you. No games. No pretending. No carefully constructed distance. Just truth. And what surprised them was how clear the words became. They already know the first thing they want you to understand. They want you to know that their silence was never as simple as it looked. There were moments when they wanted to reach toward you but stopped themselves. There were moments when they almost sent a message. Moments when they almost admitted what they were feeling. Moments when they wondered whether you were thinking about them too. But their hesitation always arrived just before their courage. Until now. Something has reversed. Now courage is beginning to arrive first. And fear is becoming the quieter voice. This is why the next chapter could look completely different from the last one. But there is still one thing standing between your soulmate and complete honesty. One final question. And strangely, this question has almost nothing to do with whether they care about you. They already know the answer to that. It has nothing to do with whether they think about you. That answer has become obvious too. The question is whether they believe they deserve the kind of connection they secretly hope could exist. That is the deeper battle. Your soulmate has carried old emotional wounds that taught them to expect disappointment whenever something mattered too much. Somewhere along their journey, they learned to associate deep attachment with the possibility of deep loss. So when something beautiful appeared, part of them wanted it. Another part immediately prepared to lose it. You may have seen that contradiction without understanding it. Warmth followed by distance. Interest followed by silence. Courage followed by hesitation. It was never necessarily about you. It was an internal conflict between desire and protection. But now they can see the pattern. And once a person truly sees their pattern, they can no longer hide inside it as easily. Your soulmate is beginning to challenge the old belief that love must always be complicated to be meaningful. They are beginning to imagine that closeness can feel safe. That honesty does not always lead to rejection. That being understood does not require performing. That the right person may not demand perfection. These thoughts have brought tears close to the surface. Not tears of sadness. Relief. Because somewhere inside them is a softer version of themselves that has waited years to hear those truths. And your connection somehow awakened that part. This is why they are overwhelmed with joy. They are not merely celebrating something happening outside them. They are experiencing an internal awakening. A door they locked themselves is opening from the inside. And behind that door is everything they were afraid to admit. Hope. Affection. Curiosity. Longing. Gratitude. And a desire to discover what could happen if they finally stopped running from their own heart. But there is still more. Your soulmate has made a small promise to themselves. This promise is important because it may determine what happens next. They have decided that if the right moment appears, they will not waste it the way they did before. They will speak. Perhaps imperfectly. Perhaps nervously. Perhaps with a trembling voice or a message rewritten 10 times before being sent. But they will try. That decision is creating the joy. For once, they feel like they are moving towards something rather than away from it. And you may not realize how significant that is. There were nights when they convinced themselves to forget. Mornings when they woke determined to focus elsewhere. Days when they kept busy because stillness made certain emotions too obvious. Yet every attempt to completely erase the significance of this connection taught them the same lesson. Some people are easy to forget because they touched only the surface. Others leave fingerprints on the way we see ourselves. You became connected to a part of their personal growth. That is why forgetting never worked. And now they no longer want it to. They are beginning to accept that caring about someone is not a weakness. It is information. It tells us where something meaningful may exist. What we do with that information is where courage begins. Your soulmate has finally reached that point. And somewhere deep within them, a sentence keeps returning. I don't want to wonder forever. Those words have become powerful. Because forever is a long time to carry an unanswered question. They have started imagining themselves months from now, perhaps years from now, looking backward. Would they regret being honest? Maybe. But would they regret never knowing? That possibility frightens them more. So joy has appeared because a decision is slowly becoming inevitable. They know what they want to do. They are simply waiting for their courage to become louder than the final pieces of fear. And something tells them that moment is closer than they expected. There is a strange tenderness around their thoughts of you now. They are no longer focused only on what they want from you. They are thinking about what you might have experienced too. They wonder whether their silence confused you. Whether their hesitation hurt you. Whether you ever questioned your own worth because they failed to communicate clearly. That possibility affects them deeply. Because they never wanted their fear to become your burden. If they could speak without interruption, they might tell you that you were never difficult to care about. The difficulty existed inside them. They were trying to understand themselves while simultaneously trying to understand what you meant to them. And perhaps they handled that imperfectly. They know this now. That awareness is creating another emotion beneath the joy. Responsibility. Not guilt. Responsibility. The willingness to acknowledge that love is not only something we feel. It is something we communicate. Something we protect. Something we demonstrate through honesty, consistency, patience, and courage. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that. And this is where everything becomes even more interesting. Because the joy they are experiencing has given them an idea. A specific idea. Something they could actually do. Something that would move this connection from imagination into reality. They have considered it more than once. At first, they dismissed it. Then they returned to it. Then they imagined your reaction. And instead of becoming frightened, they smiled. That surprised them. Because before, imagining your reaction would have filled them with nervousness. Now it fills them with anticipation. They still do not know exactly what will happen. But they know they are tired of living only inside possibilities. They want something real enough to respond to. A conversation. A gesture. An opening. A moment of truth. And the idea forming inside them could create exactly that. Yet they have not acted on it. Not yet. Because before they do, they need to answer one final question inside themselves. It is the question beneath every other question. If I open this door, am I prepared to stop pretending I don't care what happens next? They know that once they take this step, hiding will become harder. You will see something. Maybe not everything. But enough. Enough to realize their heart was never as distant as it appeared. Enough to understand that the story you thought was simple contained emotions you were never shown. Enough to recognize that while you were wondering what they felt, they were wondering whether they had the courage to let you know. And tonight, something inside them is leaning toward yes. Yes, I can be honest. Yes, I can stop running. Yes, I can accept that this person matters. Yes, I can take one step without demanding to know where the entire road leads. That is the joy. That is the shift. That is why their heart feels unusually alive. But the biggest revelation has still not been spoken. Because when your soulmate finally admitted to themselves why they were smiling, another thought immediately followed. It stopped them completely. For several seconds, everything inside them became quiet. The thought was not about the past. It was not about fear. It was not even about whether you would accept them. It was about something they suddenly realized they wanted to give you. Something they have never offered you before. Something that could explain the silence, the hesitation, the strange distance, and the feelings hidden underneath all of it. They know exactly what it is now. And they have begun wondering whether the time has finally come to place it in your hands. But before they do, there is one truth about their recent happiness that you still have not heard. Because the moment they realized what they wanted to give you, they also remembered something you once did, something you may have completely forgotten. And when that memory returned, your soulmate whispered a sentence to themselves that changed the meaning of everything.